Welcome to Skytech-Lens. On July 31, 2025, the White House abruptly ended tariff exemptions for Canada and Mexico, sending shockwaves through North America. The U.S. hiked tariffs on Canadian steel from 25% to 35%, citing national security, signaling an end to decades of preferential trade. Canada's response was immediate. Prime Minister Mark Carney announced the No Single Market Doctrine, vowing to end reliance on the U.S. and diversify supply chains. The government pledged to reprice $45 billion CAD in U.S. imports, seeking new suppliers in Europe and Asia. This wasn't just retaliation, it was a fundamental shift in Canada's economic strategy. The dispute affected $100 billion in annual trade, targeting Canada's core industries, autos, steel, aluminum, and lumber. For these sectors, the U.S. had been more than a customer, it was an extension of their operations. Now, that integration was shattered, forcing a rapid and uncertain realignment. The era of quiet diplomacy was over. A new, confrontational chapter in Canada-U.S. relations had begun. The stakes were enormous, with both economies bracing for the fallout. Canada's No Single Market Doctrine quickly became an ambitious export diversification plan. State-backed banks were tasked with helping businesses pivot from the U.S. to Europe and Asia, building resilience against American protectionism. The first phase aimed to redirect $28.3 billion in trade within a year, focusing on steel, aluminum, lumber, and even automotive products. The second phase targeted $40 billion, expanding to high-value goods like electric vehicles and agriculture. This shift would permanently alter North America's economic geography, with new east-west trade corridors challenging the old north-south routes. Canada also targeted emerging markets, including the Gulf states, for products like low-carbon steel. By cultivating these relationships, Canada aimed to ensure its future was never again tied to the political whims of a single nation. The plan was bold, urgent, and designed to make Canada's economy more resilient. Success would mean a more balanced, globally integrated trade portfolio. Canada's green credentials became its ace in the race for new markets. Canadian steel, produced in low-carbon electric arc furnaces, gained exemption from the EU's carbon border tax, giving it a major price edge. Deals quickly followed. 2 million tons of steel rerouted to Antwerp, backed by Canadian financial guarantees to lock in European buyers. Quebec's hydro-powered aluminum, with a carbon footprint a tenth of the global average, also won EU tax exemptions. A $4.8 billion deal sent 700,000 tons of aluminum to Germany and France, cementing Canada's role as a green supplier. The lumber industry, long at odds with the U.S., expanded exports to Asia, redirecting $6 billion in wood products to Japan, South Korea, and India. Rising demand in these markets offset higher shipping costs, securing new lifelines for Canadian producers. Canada's green advantage wasn't just a talking point, it was opening doors and signing contracts. The pivot to sustainable exports was real, rapid, and lucrative. At home, Canada doubled down on self-reliance. The government tightened made-in-Canada procurement rules, lowering the threshold for domestic content in public projects and raising requirements for Canadian steel and aluminum to 80%. This guaranteed demand for local industries hit by U.S. tariffs, cushioning the blow for workers. Ottawa injected $9.7 billion into the Strategic Innovation Fund, targeting manufacturing efficiency, low-carbon metallurgy, and AI in materials science. The Ultra Green Border Credit Program was announced, offering export credits to producers with low-carbon products, offsetting future foreign tariffs. These measures aim to keep Canadian industries competitive and innovative, even as they lost access to their biggest market. The government's bet innovation and sustainability would be Canada's ticket to global leadership. The domestic pivot was as bold as the international one. Diversifying trade meant overhauling Canada's infrastructure. The government fast-tracked expansion at West Coast ports, especially Prince Rupert, adding 2,200 meters of wharf 2 years ahead of schedule. Vancouver's port capacity was reallocated to prioritize trans-Pacific shipments. Rail upgrades, including double-tracking the Northgate crossing, ensured goods could move efficiently from central Canada to the coast. These projects were essential to prevent bottlenecks and keep Canadian exports competitive overseas. The investment signaled a permanent shift. Canada was building new trade arteries for a new era. Success depended on controlling logistics costs and delivering goods reliably to distant markets. The infrastructure pivot was the backbone of Canada's global strategy. The US tariffs backfired, inflicting pain on American businesses and consumers. Manufacturers faced soaring costs for Canadian steel and aluminum, squeezing margins and threatening jobs. Home builders saw lumber prices spike, raising the cost of new homes for families. The electric vehicle sector struggled as aluminum costs surged, slowing growth in a key industry. Canada's retaliation, replacing $45 billion in U.S. imports, meant American farmers and factory workers lost a major customer. The trade war's damage was self-inflicted, with ripple effects across the U.S. economy. Protectionism came at a steep price for both sides. Canada's bold pivot sparked fierce debate at home. The opposition questioned whether ports and railways could handle the surge in exports, citing past delays and labor unrest. Business leaders worried that high shipping costs could erase Canada's price advantage in distant markets. Labor unions, especially in the auto sector, feared job losses if the transition to new markets lagged behind lost U.S. sales. Provincial leaders like Ontario's Premier warned of risks to manufacturing heartlands deeply tied to the U.S. The plan's success hinged on balancing speed with stability, moving fast enough to counter U.S. tariffs, but not so fast as to destabilize key industries. The stakes were high, and skepticism ran deep. Canadians wondered, was the cure as painful as the disease? The nation braced for a turbulent transition. As the trade war deepened, both countries faced stark risks. For Canada, success depended on flawless execution, securing new contracts, finishing infrastructure, and navigating EU carbon rules. Failure could mean factory closures, job losses, and a forced return to the U.S. on weaker terms. Success would redraw North American trade, making Canada more resilient but permanently reducing U.S.-Canada ties. For the U.S., higher prices and supply chain chaos threatened growth and competitiveness. The dispute risked alienating a key ally, pushing Canada closer to Europe and Asia. The ultimate danger, a fractured continent with both nations weaker and less secure. The future of North American prosperity hung in the balance. Subscribe to the channel Skytech-Lens for more updates. Thanks.